enduring relationship between Indigenous peoples and the territories that they have traditionally occupied. We recognize and deeply appreciate the historic connection they have to this place. The land, the water, the sky, and all that live in, on, and above it. We are grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the Indigenous generations of Indigenous people who have taken care of this land and who continue to care for it. And we need to show our respect. Hundreds of years after the first treaties were signed, they remain relevant today. May they and Indigenous wisdom guide our decisions and our actions. We commit to learn, to educate, to honor sacred places, and to take action towards real truth and reconciliation. And as I often like to do, especially before Planning Council, this is a land acknowledgement, and planning should be about our lands and our attempts to take care of these lands the way the Indigenous have for eons before us. Miigwech. Was Mrs. Claus disappointed that Mr. Jarvis did not show up for breakfast?
Yes.
Well, then Mrs. Claus missed you at breakfast this morning, apparently.
Oh, sorry.
Is there any open forum? Has Mrs. Claus asked to speak to us this morning? Okay, thank you. With that, we have a planning application report, and I believe I have to make a speech before we hear that one. This morning, there's a public meeting scheduled for one proposed zoning bylaw amendment. I will briefly summarize the procedure to be utilized for the meeting. First, the clerk will advise council as to when, how, and to whom notice of the public meeting was circulated for the proposed amendment being considered. The clerk will also advise of the appeal procedures. Next, staff will advise of the purpose and effect of the bylaws and provide any other information that is relevant to the applications, and the clerk will summarize any correspondence on file. From there, the public will have an opportunity to provide comments on the amendments being considered. Please be respectful of time and be concise with your comments. And by the way, that sentence should be relevant to councillors as well. All commentators are requested to state their name and address and sign in on the sheet provided. After the public discussion, the public meeting will be closed. Council will then have an opportunity to provide comments for clarification. I now declare this meeting to be a public meeting pursuant to Section 34 of the Planning Act to deal with the following proposed amendment. Z 2314 for 38378 Georgian Bay Shore. To our clerk.
Notice of the public meeting was sent by first-class mail to the respective owners and assessed persons within 120 to 800 meters of the property subject to the proposed application, and to those persons and agencies likely to have an interest in the application. These notices were sent at least 30 days prior to this morning's meeting. Included in each notice was an explanation of the purpose and the effect of the proposed applications, and a key map showing the location of the properties or description of the lands to be affected by the proposed amendments. Other relevant information may also have been provided. These circulations were all provided in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act and the Township of Georgian Bay Official Plan. Members of the public are advised at this point that unless they make an oral or written submission to council before council makes a decision on these applications, that any subsequent appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal may be dismissed by the tribunal. Anyone who wishes to be notified of council's decision respecting the proposed zoning bylaw amendments must submit a written request to the planning department.
Thank you. And with that, to our planner, Ms. Wanfor, I believe you're presenting this report. Please go ahead.
Can I have permissions? Thanks. Through the chair, the lands subject to this rezoning have a frontage of 210 meters and an area of 7.59 acres. They are characterized by granite rock with an abundance of mature trees and natural vegetation. The lands are designated waterfront within the district and township official plans and are located within the Wawatasi waterfront community. Most of the shoreline contains type 2 fish habitat, and a wetland that is not of provincial interest is located on a portion of the lands. The Tetanak Ecosystem Special Policy Area also abuts the lands. The property is currently zoned Shoreline Residential Island Type 2. The zoning bylaw amendment is required as a condition of approval for consent application B21-22 that was approved on September 16, 2022 by the Committee of Adjustment, which severs the subject lands. The condition requires the applicant to rezone development exclusion areas identified in the associated environmental impact study. Since the date of the decision, a new report has been prepared by Frycorp Ecological Services, which assessed the environmental impacts of potential future building envelopes within areas previously identified as environmental constraint areas. The report concluded the impacts of development will not result in any residual negative impacts through effective employment of the recommended mitigation measures. The township's environmental consultants, Hutchinson Environmental Services, reviewed the report, validated the assessment of potential impacts, as well as supported and provided additional mitigation measures. Mitigation measures identified by both parties will be implemented through site plan control, which is also a condition of approval for the consent. The EIS prepared by Frycorp states the site assessment did not find any species protected under the Endangered Species Act present on the site. However, the site does contain habitat that is consistent with the definition of general habitat for the species addressed in this report, as well as regulated habitat for eastern fox snake. Implementing the mitigation measures described in this report will reduce or eliminate negative impacts to these habitats. Frycorp consulted with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks to assess potential impacts of the proposed development envelopes on species at risk. MECP indicated that they do not believe the Endangered Species Act will be contravened and thus no authorization under the ESA is required. The EIS concluded that the development will not adversely impact the ecological features or functions of the Tetanak Ecosystem Special Policy Area. In accordance with the decision of consent application B21-22, the purpose of the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is to rezone a portion of the lands identified as having environmental constraints in an environmental impact study to an Environmental Protection 1 exception zone and rezone potential building envelopes to a Shoreline Residential Island Type 2 exception zone. The effect of the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is to protect environmental features while allowing for limited development on the property in accordance with the zoning bylaw. No buildings or structures are being proposed as part of this application. In accordance with the EIS, the lands to be zoned EP1 exception encompass a 30-meter buffer around the snake shedding site, an organic thicket swamp, and a large buffer around shoreline. The EP1 zone only permits conservation and accessory dock uses. The areas to be zoned Shoreline Residential Island Type 2 exception will be subject to the SRI2 zone provisions, as well as any other applicable provisions in the zoning bylaw. For example, if in the future a sleeping cabin is being proposed on the property, it will not only need to be located outside of areas zoned EP exception, but will also have to comply with the provisions identified in Section 4 of the zoning bylaw, which include maximum building height, minimum required yards, and floor area limitations. The site-specific zone, SRI2, exception will include provisions that prevent the need for a Technical Planning Act application in the future. Since the publishing of the staff report, the draft bylaw has been revised. Rather than rezoning a portion of the lands to Environmental Protection Type 1, these lands will be rezoned to an Environmental Protection Type 1 exception zone. The exception exempts development from Section 4.5 of the zoning bylaw, which requires a 15-meter setback from this zone. The zoning bylaw amendment schedule includes the dimensions of the areas to be rezoned for potential development and setbacks from lot lines to these areas so that they can be more accurately and easily identified on future development plans. Planning staff are recommending approval of this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, any correspondence has any correspondence been received on this application?
No correspondence has been received.
All right, then my next question, are there any members of the public who wish to comment on this application?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of council. John Jackson here. I'm the agent for this application. My address is 1 Mall Drive, Unit 2, Parry Sound, Ontario, P2A2A9. I think Shania has covered most of the background here, which goes back almost 2 years now. This actually is a technical application to fulfill one of the conditions of the consent for the estate. And I would offer any answers to any questions if there are any, although I believe that this matter is pretty much in line with what Shania has recommended with staff, and would thank Planning Council to support the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jackson. Are we aware of any other members of the public or the applicant who wishes to speak to this? Seeing none at this moment, I'm going to turn it over to our council, and we'll start with Councillor Predko, please.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. Just a question to our planner, Shania. I notice on the diagram on page 8, which has the SR2 exception zones with the sleeping cabins and proposed cottage and the environmental protection zones. In the original environmental report, there were 2 sleeping cabins in their I guess, original proposal. And on our SR2 exceptions, there's a tiny piece of the west proposed sleeping cabin left on the diagram. Is that really just a slight error on the reproduction of the diagram? We wouldn't actually have a tiny piece of SR2 exception that you couldn't use, and that should just be removed from the diagram?
Through the chair, that is not an error, to answer your question. That was revised in order to show a 20-meter setback from the high water mark, which is a requirement for sleeping cabins. It does still appear to have a 9x12 area for development, but it's also attached to the lands to be remain zoned SRI2, which would also allow for the sleeping cabin to be in that abutting zone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper, please.
Thank you, Mayor. And just for our planning staff, Shania, thank you for the report. Just a few clarifications on this. I want to start by saying I did speak to Mr. Matthews a couple of years ago when he was first coming forward with this, and thought it looked like it was reasonable, some of it. And but I wanted to just clarify. It mentions the acreage or and frontage. The frontage that's measured, is it straight line frontage? In other words, it's I think 200 something meters, 210 meters maybe. Is that a straight line from the other property straight up to the sort of point of land, or did it go around? Are you going around the corner with the frontage?
Through the chair, the frontage is measured from one iron bar to another, and I'll show you a visual what I mean. Is that allowed? So the frontage is measured from this iron bar here
Yes,
to this iron bar over here.
so it's straight line.
Yes.
Good, okay, thank you. That answers that. And the land area is something in excess of 6, 7, 8 acres, something like that. Is that correct?
7.59 acres to answer your question.
Okay, well, my math isn't quite as precise, but that seems fine. And the setbacks, all the setbacks are for the buildings are minimum 20 meters,
Through the chair, that is correct. A minimum 20 meters.
which I think is required. It meets our requirement, their requirement in Wauwatosa.
Through the chair, that is my understanding, yes.
I'm sorry?
That is my understanding, yes.
And the final question is the proposed cottage. I'm trying to do the math, but approximate size of that proposed cottage?
Through the chair, I do not know the approximate size of the proposed cottage. There's no development being proposed. These are just potential future envelopes that they can build within.
But there are requirements in terms of the, oh, sorry. It's not picking up the sound. But I would assume that they'd be required to meet the building size cap in the Wauwatosa area, which I think is somewhere around 3,000 to 3,500 square feet. Is that what would happen if they came forward with the final design?
Through the chair, they would be subject to the SRI 2 zone requirements. If the Wauwatosa waterfront community regulates gross floor area and things like that as well, development will be subject to those provisions.
Okay, so I think then the building envelope is probably larger than what would be allowed. I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? I want to make just a comment that I greatly appreciate all the work that's gone into this, including by the applicant and their agents. I think it's very impressive how they are doing their best to have minimal development with minimal impact on a very rich lot. When I say rich, with all the attributes of the lot, natural attributes, and I applaud that. This is a beautiful area, and they're doing their best to minimize their impact, and I think we should appreciate that. Councillor Jarvis.
Yeah, I will agree with the Mayor on those comments. I just would like this to be a good example for any proposal, whether it's a rebuild, addition, or whatever on property, because I know this property owners had to go through considerable expense and effort to get this type of work done, but it is extensive and really appreciated. As we stated, I'd like to see some of this apply to other applications that aren't necessarily new builds for the future, but that's just my comments. But thank you for the work on it.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper, you have an additional remark?
Yeah, my apologies, and I just wanted to reinforce that, thank the Mayor and Councillor Jarvis for their comments. This is an example of reasoned and well respectful of the environment, and we could use this as an example to many, and I would encourage our planning department to use this as an example because we don't always see this kind of respect for the environment, and that's number one on our goals at the Township of Georgian Bay, and it'd be great to see more of this, less of some other things that I see. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hazelton. It's amazing how I started and asked any other remarks, so I make a closing remark, and now 1, 2, 3 councillors speak up. It's a little frustrating, but go ahead, Councillor Hazelton.
Sorry to be late to the game here, but Shania, could you put up that one of the last slides you had where you had the 2 boxes on either side showing the conditions of zoning or whatever you had, because I couldn't find that in the documentation.
Through the chair, these are excerpts from the draft bylaw, which was revised since the report was published. So the draft bylaw attached to the report does differ from this one.
Okay. So, I've been delighted with all of the work that I've seen done, et cetera. And then I was reading through here, and you're suggesting here on the left-hand side that the subject land shall not be subject to a 15-meter setback from the environmental protection zone. And on the right-hand side, you're saying basically the same thing. And I would like to understand why there is and this almost seems like it's a precedent-setting condition that there is going to be no setback from the EP1 zone. Could you help me understand that?
Through the chair, both of those exceptions were required in order to facilitate development within the proposed future envelope areas. We cannot require a 15-meter setback from the land surrounding those envelopes because then no development would be able to comply with that. So as you can see on the zoning bylaw schedule, you'll see the lands to be zoned SRI 2 exception. You'll see lands to be remain zoned SRI 2, and then you'll see all of those lands are surrounded by an environmental protection exception zone. So we cannot require a 15-meter setback from the EP zone because development then could not occur within these potential future envelopes in these SRI 2 zones.
So I think you've explained what I had understood by reading what you are sharing. And I would like to understand why this is appropriate in this location, because my fear is there may be lots of other properties where there may be a desire to develop something close to an EP, and we are going to waive the setback requirements here. I'm just trying to understand what the justification is here so that we don't set a precedent for later.
Through the chair, this site-specific exemption was included to avoid a technicality when it comes to the building permit stage in the future. For example, if I were to propose a cottage within the proposed cottage envelope area, and we did not have this, notwithstanding section 4.5, development is not subject to a 15-meter setback from the EP zone, which surrounds the envelope, well then I would not be able to develop within that envelope because I'm not complying with a 15-meter setback from the surrounding EP zone. So this is just to avoid issues in the future at the building permit stage. This is to avoid the potential for another zoning bylaw amendment in the future because of that section 4.5 of the zoning bylaw.
So thank you for that, and I'm going to just offer that I'm going to label that as these are procedural processes that enable something else to take place, and I get that. What I would like to understand is what is the planning and environmental justification for not requiring a setback from an EP?
Through the chair, that would be the environmental impact study that was done in support of this application.
Okay, that's what I needed to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, I think if I may, just to reiterate, on this particular property, an extensive study was done of the environmental circumstances and reviewed by our, we had it reviewed, and both parties agreed that development could take place as carefully defined here. But I still think that the 15-meter setback from environmentally protected area is a good rule, which would require extensive reports like this if you want to exceed it or lessen it depending on how you look at it. But I'm going to go back to, I respect the fact that they did a lot of work on these lands in order to have development that is, has a minimal environmental impact.
So if I may,
You may.
I think it's important when we display that grid that you got where the notwithstanding clauses are being used, I think it would be useful to connect some dots here. So any future planner or environmental person or builder who sees why we've done those exceptions, that it is because of this beforehand extensive rigorous environmental studies and peer reviews that now enable those notwithstanding clauses to be considered. Because if we don't connect those dots, I can see a flood of applications coming forward where people want to develop properties and not have a 15-meter setback from an environmental scenario, and probably don't want to do the environmental studies and peer reviews to get there. So I'm not criticizing what has been done. I'm just trying to prevent for the future somebody looking at it and saying, well, there's a precedent, I can just jump on that. No, that's not a precedent per se. That is a precedent, sorry, that is a decision made after all this incredible work done on the environmental side. And I think we need to articulate that ultimately in these decisions.
Well, I think, Councillor, that it's clear that they need council approval to get this exemption. And they presented all this documentation in order to get that exemption. So to me, the precedent being set is if you want an exception to that rule, you better do a heck of a lot of homework. And after you've done the homework, council still gets to say yay or nay. And we don't know yet how this council is going to vote in this application. Councillor Cooper, you want to go at it again? I'm allowing you a third time, by the way.
I realize
And
you
I
are.
don't want to set precedent by
No,
that.
we would hate to do that. That
Yes.
would have more comments are needed. But Ryan, did you want to listen? Well,
He hasn't gone over his 2.5 minutes either in any of the time. So let's be clear.
go ahead. So, but you're getting me into 2 minutes. So, the reason I wanted to comment is a couple of things. One is that, yes, there is a precedent, I guess, in the sense that you said, but let's remember. Sorry, no.
Microphone is still not on.
Geez,
There we
come
go.
on. Let's remember. Now we're starting at 2.5 minutes. Let's remember that there's a couple of things that we should keep in the back of our minds. This is a very large piece of property with a lot of, I would say, undeveloped area, an incredible amount. I think something in the neighborhood of probably 15, close to 15 acres maybe. And we're talking about 2 buildings and going up and potentially in this area. And I just think we need to remember that. You can't really use this as a sort of a go-to example to allow something in that has very little land. So I think that's something we need to keep in the back of our minds. And so I would really encourage this kind of thing. And remember this shoreline, while there's fish habitat along there on one little area, there's a lot of basically rock barren. And yes, there may be some fox snakes, and there are a lot of properties with fox snakes on them, and we understand that. And I think we've got a really sensible owner and sensible development here. And I think that's what we should keep in the back of our minds. And I finally would like to say, and I know the mayor wants to move on, but I think it's important that we have had this discussion, because I think these are the kind of examples that we should draw out and say, wow, this is the way to do it. And I think that's what we're saying today. So thank you.
And if anybody doubts it, they just have to review this, because that remark has now been made a few times. So, and I'm sure at least once for each planner in this room. Anyway, with that, and no, I'm not seeing any more hands. I have moved by Councillor Hazelton, seconded by Councillor Bocek. Be it resolved, the council enacts bylaw 2024-014, being zoning bylaw amendment Z23-14, to further amend zoning bylaw 2014-75 by rezoning a portion of the lands legally described as Part 3 on Reference Plan BR-1610, Tatanack Peninsula, Township of Georgian Bay, District Municipality of Muskoka, from the Shoreline Residential Island Type 2 Zone 2A, Environmental Protection Zone, Environmental Protection 1 or EP1 Zone, lands as shown in red with diagonal hatch pattern on Schedule A to the bylaw, and B, Shoreline Residential Island Type 2 Exception SR I2-XX Zone, land shown as the yellow solid shapes on Schedule A to the bylaw. All those in favor? And that is passed 6-1. All right, thank you very much. Our next topic of discussion is direction on defining H2 hold criteria. Councillor Hazelton, I believe this report has your name on it.
It would be, yes. And presumably everybody has read the package and understand that this is really dusting off directions that have been provided in the past, and indicating that we would like our staff to take what they have heard in the past and take directions what they've heard in the past, and feel free to ask whatever questions they would like, but to move forward with dealing with this matter that has been mentioned to us by everybody, including our lawyer, that we need to get on with it and fix the wording. So that's about all I need to say, I think.
Thank you. Any comments, Councillor? Oh, sorry, Mr. Whitlib, you want to respond to it before I go to council?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, perhaps happy to hear Planning Council's comments, and then I'll speak to it.
Okay. Councillor Cooper.
Well, of course, I would certainly support doing something about H2. This has been on our plate for a long time and needs to be dealt with. There are something like 1,200 properties with an H2 on them, just along coastal Georgian Bay alone. They have that designation on them for a very good reason. Our planner at the time said, these are small properties and they probably shouldn't be developed. And that's why H2 was created. Unfortunately, in 2014, the verbiage around H2 was not fully developed by our planning consultant at the time. And that was a very unfortunate thing, because we've had numerous situations since then dealing with this. So I would encourage that we get this H2 cleaned up as soon as possible, because frankly, we won't be able to apply the kind of thinking that we discussed about this last property just now, the Matthews property in Wauwatosa. We'll be dealing with shoals with apartment buildings on them. I'm being a bit facetious, but you know, I really think that we need to think about so Georgian Bay and the environment, and that the H2 was put there, or an example of it, quite some time ago, and unfortunately it got by us in 2014, and we need to deal with it. That's a long time ago, I might add, almost 10 years ago. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Predko.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Actually, my question would be directed to Director of Planning or the Chair of the Planning Advisory Committee, or both. I completely understand and agree with the need to address the H2 hold issue. My question really is a matter of how does this interlace with the official plan project, as well as the work that the Planning Advisory Committee is doing in general. Is this complementary, or is it going to interfere or cause duplication of effort? or confusion. So I'm not sure who would like to answer first, but that would be my question.
Director Whitlam.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor Predko. In answer to the question, no, it does not interfere or conflict with that process. Section I, implementation of the official plan, already contains a great set of tools in our toolbox to ensure appropriate development takes place. And the way I would envision, subject to direction today from Planning Council, the way I would envision the process to unfold, it would be for staff to simply proceed to recommend an amendment to the zoning bylaw to Planning Council that would draw on those tools that already exist in our official plan.
If I could follow up on that, my question would be to the chair of the Planning Advisory Committee, Councillor Hazelton. I believe in November, we gave direction, we being council gave direction to the Planning Committee to consider and report back to us on the H2 situation. And I'm wondering if this motion would be removing that assignment from the Planning Advisory Committee, or I almost feel like there's almost like a conflict here. So that's if you could clarify your intention on that, please.
I think probably the best way to answer that is matters come from council directed to the Planning Advisory Committee. Planning Advisory Committee discusses the matter. Planning staff are there during the meeting to hear what is being discussed. The Planning Advisory Committee may or may not provide a resolution asking council to take further action. And I would conclude that on this matter and on some other matters, the Planning Advisory Committee were comfortable with the presence of the planning staff, understanding what the discussions were, and that there was no need to provide a resolution back to council.
Okay, but then I'm wondering when I read this, and you say, and the recorded resolution from Planning Committee in the draft motion on the, be it resolved in the second paragraph that staff prepare new wording, but it makes reference to and the recorded resolution from Planning Committee.
Oh, because a year ago in September of 2022, there was a resolution from the Planning Committee.
Okay.
So all I'm trying to do is list some of the directions that have been provided to council or to staff in the past. All I'm really saying here is in that statement that there has been lots of recorded conversations and resolutions in the past. We don't need to record anything new. We just need to understand that there is lots of direction in the past to take action, and there's lots of additional information that has been captured in meetings, etc. And all we really need now is kind of a new direction from council, planning council, to staff to take action.
All right, so then I'm going to go back to the first part. I mean, I'm not trying to be difficult here, just for clarification, but
Okay.
in November, I think it was November, council gave direction to Planning Committee to come back with a report on H2 holds. Are we now, should we retract that direction because we're going straight to staff?
No, if I could clarify that, council provided direction to list a variety of topics for the Planning Committee to discuss. There was no direction from council to the Planning Committee to bring back a resolution. It was to hear the topics you discuss, and I will offer that in our last Planning Advisory Committee meeting last Friday, we discussed several topics. We were all very comfortable that the planning department heard what we were discussing. We asked if they wanted us to prepare a resolution to council, then directing them to do something. And there was a general consensus that no, we didn't need to do that. And so I think as a kind of a process, if you will, or a procedure where planning staff basically where they have the ball and don't need to be told again what things they should be considering, and they're quite prepared to take and run with that ball. then that makes sense.
Okay, so then I'm going to go back to Director Whitlib. Do you feel that you need any further input from the Planning Advisory Committee to, I'll call it, satisfy this direction should council approve this particular motion?
Through the mayor to council, certainly staff are part of the lengthy discussion that took place at Planning Advisory Committee. I think there is some very healthy debate about the details of implementation and what that may look like. But I think the direction from staff's perspective is clear, is that there's a desire across the board to get on with it, as I heard one of the councilors say earlier tonight. So I think staff have the direction we require. The only comment I did wish to make is I noted the draft resolution asked that the matter come back to the, I believe, the March meeting. Appreciate Councillor Cooper's comments that this issue has been simmering for a decade, and staff would simply beg for a little more time than a week that we have in terms of our internal process to come up with a report in time for March. So something beyond March would be more useful to staff, as we do have ongoing priorities we need to attend to.
And are you thinking in terms of April, May, next year? Like, I'm sure that the mover and seconder would like an estimated time from you.
I can probably add some color to this. So for the March council meeting, staff is going to be presenting an updated work plan with some timing. And so, for example, for the planning department, council will see the workload, anticipated timeframes to complete various files, and then at that point, so we will include this activity on the time frame, and then council can decide if they want to prioritize it further up and so on. So we need some time to put together some timelines, because understandably council is aware and the Planning Advisory Committee is aware that we have a full almost a full planning staff complement, but we can't get everything done all within a month. There still needs some time to prioritize all the different activities that we're doing.
But I would like to go to the mover and seconder of this motion and for modification to that last line. And I'm predicting that they would like to put a month in there as opposed to leaving open-ended. And if so, I'm asking your input as to what month you would like to see. And then I'm going to go to them to see whether they are willing to modify the motion to that particular month. I'm not trying to be difficult, but I think it's important. Please.
Through the mayor, I'm happy to speak to that. As the CO indicated, there may be a number of competing priorities, and there's certainly a number of matters that are of great importance to the township. If this is a number one priority, as my sense is that it may be, happy to put that first on the list in that reporting that the CAO mentioned for March. Having said that, that additional month, say, looking to bring this back for April, again, if this is the priority item for council, then our April report would be doable for planning staff to bring back some detailed recommendations on how to proceed.
Councilors Hazel and Cooper, if I see your hand, but I just want to finish this further. As a friendly amendment, would you accept April versus March? Okay, thank you. Okay, but I'm going to go then to Councillor Bocek because he had his hand up before, and then I'll go to Councillor Cooper. But in the meantime, I'll just make that change for now. Councillor Bocek, you did have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. And through you, Chair, I direct my question to Derek and planning. This was a direction of council, and council reigned supreme that the decision to make changes to the H2 was a direction of council. There was different feelings at that time of what the H2 should be. So my request to you is, when you bring back a report, could you bring back what currently is held within the H2 parameters, what amendments will be made to those items, and what new additions will be made to those new items? So it's very easy for council to see what changes are being made, and we won't have to go back and research back 10 years to when this all started back in 2014. So that would be a request of mine, that we had a laundry list of what the parameters were for an H2, what is going to be amended, and what's going to be addition to. And that would certainly help me out. Thank you.
Through the mayor, and I thank Councillor Bocek for the comment. That's certainly what staff would envision in terms of the contents of that report, as well as the report would present options. So there wouldn't just be one recommended course of action. There'd be a range of options for council to consider, and staff would likely recommend one of those options as a preferred option, but of course defer to council's guidance on that.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor, for letting me comment again. And April would be just lovely after 10 years. April would be pretty damn exciting. I just would remind us all, though, and Councillor Bocek, that if you look at some of our holds in our official plan, many of them have a lot of criteria. Unfortunately, the H2 alone, which was the most risky one, was ill-advisedly given one criteria, which is a survey alone, which was most problematic because the survey is not telling you any of the site-specific issues that are there with respect to the environment, which we say is number one. And so, I'm not lecturing the planning department here. It's more of a historical thing to understand that the survey issue that was, or this requirement was put in there was the most unfortunate oversight at the time. And, you know, if we leave it much longer, the only thing I can suggest is that there's a tool available in the planning world, what's called an interim control bylaw, because you've got to avoid, in my view, with these H2 properties, the whole horse bolting from the barn. So we don't want that to happen this spring. So let's be careful and make sure that we deal with the H2 in a reasonable time. That doesn't mean we're going to have all the other requirements with respect to all other changes to our official plan. I understand that, but this one is a risky one, and I hopefully think that we can deal with it right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Graziano.
Thank you, Worship. I do agree. I think that this is a priority to us. I think that this review is well needed, and I think based on our CAO's comments that according to my opinion, it is something that I think we should get on the agenda sooner rather than later. However, with that said, hearing comments now, I would strongly caution against an interim control bylaw. We've seen them implemented in the past, and they were very ineffective tools. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bocek, did you re-raise your hand, or is that okay? You got an additional comment? Will you turn on your mic?
Sorry. And through you, Chair, I think just to comment on Councillor Cooper, I think I remember the closed session meetings back in 2014, and it was about non-space islands and what we're going to do to restrict build on these small islands. And the council of the day was a little bit split, and some wanted more, and some wanted less, and some wanted none in the way of restrictions on the H2. So I think we have a different council today. I think we have a different environment today. And I think it's time that we all put our heads together and came up with a solution that is going to carry us through at least the next decade. I think we need to we need to come to bat here on this one.
I think, if I may, the H2, when it was created, regardless of the opinions of individual councillors at the time, when the H2 was created, it had a single purpose. And the single purpose was to prevent development on undersized island properties. I think we're recognizing through experience that we should consider other restrictions before development is not allowed, not just the size. So it's not that the H2 in itself was faulty, it's just in hindsight, some feel it was incomplete. And I'm looking forward to the planning department's recommendations as to what other, I'll call it potential holes there might be that could be plugged by a hold. And it may not be an H2, they may call it an H22 for all I know. But I think we have to recognize that when the H2 was created, it was created with a single purpose. And now we're wondering about other purposes as well. I mean, for instance, H2 does not cover any mainland property. It only covers island properties. And it's only to confirm that it's big enough to allow development, not whether or not that development would be advisable on all sorts of other criteria. So I'm really looking forward to this report. I have moved by Councillor Hazelton, second by Councillor Cooper. Whereas there is outstanding direction from council for staff to prepare new wording and criteria for lifting an H2 hold. And whereas the spring 2024 building season is quickly approaching, be it resolved the council directs staff to review the material covering the matter of the deficiency of the wording of H2 holds, and the staff prepare a new wording and criteria for lifting an H2 hold by reflecting on the concerns from GBT legal staff, council, and the recorded resolutions from planning committee and other sources. And the staff report back to council with recommendations no later than April 2024 planning council meeting for review, and I'll say potential approval. All those in favor? And we have a unanimous vote on this one. Or if you like that translated into that 7 votes, that includes the mayor. I'm sorry, I'm throwing a little bit back at you, that's all. Yeah, you can take it. All right. I have moved by Councillor Jarvis, second by Councillor Predko. Be it resolved, the Planning Council adopt bylaw 2024-015 SRA deeming bylaw for 14936 Georgian Bay Shore. Perhaps we should have a quick explanation before I call the vote. Madam Deputy Clerk.
Through your worship. So the original SRA closing bylaw was adopted in December by council. This is the accompanying deeming bylaw. When our lawyers went to register everything on title, they realized they never sent the municipality over the deeming bylaw. So this is just kind of formality to get that passed so they can register the SRA.
Formality is normally included when we have it in
exactly.
front of us. Yeah, okay. Any questions, council? Council Cooper.
Just for clarification, this is a property on Bone Island, is that correct? Sure. Oh, but it's the Kemerer property. It's Georgian Bay, it's not Bone Island.
It is a Georgian Bay Shore property. I'm not sure if it's Bone Island. I would have to look up the file.
Do we know which Kemerer it is?
No, this was presented in December, and council did receive a full report.
That was on Bone Island. We saw it in December, and that's my memory telling me. But I always like to know exactly where we're talking about. And
the address is
14936
Georgian Bay Shore.
It's in
our building department's on
it. Sorry to be a pest. It really helps to remind us.
Yeah, sorry. It's just around the corner from Tomahawk.
Okay.
So it's like
that'll be on the shoreline then.
Yeah.
Sorry, near Weber, south of Weber. Beside Plaxton, okay.
Plaxton and Turnville?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other question? Councillor Jarvis.
I was just going to comment that I'm agreeing with Councillor Cooper. Even though this is a formality, just to have a diagram where it is would be helpful for future reference. That's all.
Noted.
If I
Councillor Hazelton.
I'm kind of excited about being on the Committee of Adjustment, and I wanted to share that our chair has been leveraging Google Maps to allow us to easily identify where something is. Anybody can look at it and zoom right in to get an accurate location. And it seems like it's a great tool that we should adopt so that questions that we just had from Councillor Cooper as to where it is like a heartbeat to find it. So it's generally available, and our chair of the Committee of Adjustment uses it and shares it. So I think we should adopt it. Thank you. Bye.
And I'll say hello after that. I mean, it's something that I know I have asked frequently of prior planning staff members who are no longer here, that a little chart of the township itself with a little star on it really helps us narrow it in on for some properties for future reports.
Through the mayor, thank you. So if I'm understanding correctly, a location map that perhaps pans out a bit wider to give the context. Okay,
Exactly.
not a problem. Thank you.
There's a heck of a lot of shoreline in our township, and some of us are familiar with some of it. I don't think any of us, even Councillor Bocek, is familiar with all of it. Council, I'm going to remind you of the motion because we had some conversation here, but I have moved by Councillor Jarvis, seconded by Councillor Predko. Be it resolved that Planning Council adopts bylaw 2024-015 SRA deeming bylaw for 14936 Georgian Bay Shore. All those in favor? And that is carried 6-1. This is yours. Yes, sir.
Perhaps I was away on vacation or missed a meeting where Councillor Hazelton joined or became part of the Committee of Adjustments. So perhaps I didn't read it in the minutes of the meeting.
He was appointed, was it November, December? I can't remember.
December via bylaw.
Yeah, so I must have been away because it's news to me and I didn't hear it until just today. So is there minutes of that meeting that I can review?
Actually, you were here at the meeting and you voted and supported it.
I don't remember it.
Oh, I remember clearly. I was shocked that you actually
I
supported
would be
me.
shocked. I would be shocked too.
You must have been asleep.
You know,
Maybe that's why I approved it. Maybe I was sleeping. No, I don't. Honestly, I don't.
well,
Can we have a motion for reconsideration?
okay,
will,
before I lose control of this meeting, I have moved by Councillor Graziano, seconded by Councillor Bocek. Be it resolved that Planning Council adopts bylaw 2024-016 to confirm the proceedings of the February 13th, 2024 Planning Council meeting. All those in favor? And that is passed unanimously. And moved by Councillor Predko, second by Councillor Graziano. Be resolved, the Planning Council does now adjourn at 9:59 a.m. It's a.m. Until March 5th, 2024 at 9 a.m. or at the call of the chair. All those in favor? And that is carried. That was a 58-minute Planning Council meeting.